This week, Gaz Whelan, founding member of Yogi G and the Family Tree, talks about his new album, his OCD life, and for those who just love a Happy Monday story, there's some of those later too.
The brain's built not to keep us happy, but to keep us alive. So we're looking for darkness all the time. First diagnosis when I was 11 from the psychiatrist was he's got a phobia of thoughts. I had a couple of my friends we had a little poetry club in the local library when we were on the dole in the 80s. We could never tell our mates in that. We'd get bullied, they'd take the piss out of us. And it's a shame that with the Mondays, chaos just followed us organically. We'd feel like this image, we'd bounce into a town loud, lager loud. So couldn't be more the opposite. But it just followed us. It just did. We just had that. It was chaos. Now I'm older. I look back and I think I quite like being on the outside. Being outside, I quite like it, but I didn't at the time.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Now, this is an interview with and about Gaz Whelan and the new Yogi G and the Family Tree album, Show Me the Truth. Now, first off, Gaz talks about what his parents did when he was young.
Well, my mum worked nights at a psychiatric hospital in Swinton, Salford, where we lived, and my dad was an industrial electrician. He worked away a lot abroad. So my nan, my mum's mother, my nan, we spent a lot of time with. She kind of not brought us up, but she played a big, which in them days, in the 70s and early 80s, was common.
Were they musical in any way, including your nan? Any of them?
Well, my nan was. She was a singer and a dancer around the Manchester and Salford clubs during and after the war. Never professional. And on the American Army base in between Manchester, near Warrington, halfway between Manchester and Liverpool. There's an American Army base that they used to go to. My mum wasn't. My dad wasn't. He was a typical builder. You know, he used to call me dickhead. From being young, he was like, you know, if you picture the royal family, the TV, that's kind of my family. But we lived in, as all the Mondays did, we all lived in a kind of the suburb. There's this kind of myth that we grew up on this tough estate in inner city Manchester. We didn't. We grew up in the leafy suburbs, you know. But my older sister was musical. She was studying guitar, classical guitar and piano, and that's where I started. 8 years of age, I went for classical guitar lessons. This is in the 70s, mid 70s. So you couldn't really get guitar lessons like you could now. You had to go to a school teacher who was, you know, giving lessons at night, and I hated it. I hated doing classical. I wanted to play, you know, rock and whatever.
Whose decision was it then to have classical guitar lessons?
Well, my sister, my older sister was having piano lessons, and I wanted to have guitar lessons. I'd seen Top of the Pops, you know, and I wanted to be in a band, and I wanted to play guitar, and that was the only option. And my sister said, "Well, I'm a kind of introvert in an extrovert's body, so people are surprised when they say I'm shy, but I really am." And so I didn't want to go on my own. So my sister agreed to go with me, and she excelled. She was studious and she excelled, and I was awful. And then I did that for 4 years. And when I was 11, I had a really nasty accident when I nearly lost my arm. I didn't gain control of it for 5 or 6 years. So I gave up. I got out of it. So then I ended up picking drums up because that's all I was left.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get onto that in a minute, but I just wondered how, you know, your nan sang, you know, you said like not professionally, but sang in clubs.
Yeah.
And your parents weren't musical, but how did they view creativity? Was it ever something that could be a job? Because I think of my parents, my father was a market trader, and they were much more about you need to do something that earns you a living, and creativity didn't earn you a living.
Well, my last job was a market trader, actually, with my mum. My mum had a little business selling bedding, just a bit of a side. So I actually loved it. It was actually a great job. Well, we always had music. My parents were both crazy rock and rollers. So there was always me. My dad loved Ray Charles, Little Richard, of course, Elvis. Eddie Cochran was a big one of his, and the Platters, all that kind of, and gospel. So we had music on constantly. And he was a huge Isaac Hayes fan, really a bit random, but he was. So we had all that soul and gospel music and rock and roll. So they were really, so that was always in the house, always, always. So that was always partying. So that was always around. So, and I'd shown from an early age, I'd done well at junior school for a left. We did, Salford had scrapped the 11 plus, but it was the first couple of years they did it. So we did a mock 11 plus, and I got 97%. So there was a couple of options. Salford grammar was full. I could have gone to Bolton Grammar, but being 11-year-old, I didn't want to pick up a Bolton accent. I know it looks ridiculous, so I refused to go. And all my friends were going to the local comprehensive, which had been a grammar school, so we still had good teachers. So they knew that, and then I had the accent, and after that, and football was my thing. I was doing really well in football. A lot of clubs early, had a couple of trials. They knew I wasn't going to do a regular job, and I've been seeing a child psychologist since the age of 11 for usual issues, OCD, depression. I don't think I was going to, and anxiety. I don't think I was going to fit into that role. So they accepted that, and they were happy. In fact, when I was 15, when the Mondays first started, I was still at school. Paul Ryder gave me the tape around about Christmas time, and I had another 5 months of school to finish. And my mum just said, "Forget going to school, just learn this and go." So they've had quite accepted quite the opposite.
I'm going to keep going backwards and forwards here, but the you know, if because I'm now, what am I, 60, I can't remember, 66. And so my parents were of like the war generation. And I think it was quite typical then for a number of generations that the father was very emotionally unavailable. My father really didn't have a lot to do with me, and then he left. And I just wondered if your father was also the way, your mother was a psychiatric nurse, but your father sounds like that he might have been emotionally unavailable to you. Was he?
Yeah, but he was, yeah, from that era. I mean, he was born in the 43 or something like that, 44. He died about 4 years ago, but but he was he'd come from a very tough upbringing near Strangeways Prison in Salford in Manchester, Irish immigrant parents and he was a younger child by about 15 years. His older brother ended up playing football for Man City. God forbid, we never forgive him for that. But he got he had a tough, and he never laid a finger on us, never hit us, never nothing. He was lovely, he was a sweet, quiet man, very funny. Jim Royal from the Royal family was like that. But yeah, there was no, they never hugged or kissed or anything. But I always felt, I knew I was loved. I never felt unloved. It was just a different. No, he played no role in it whatsoever. No, no, he was very like that. He was embarrassed. It was all sarcasm with him because he couldn't deal with. Which I realised looking back now that I'd adopted that and have done it for years, everyone thought it was fun, confident, this funny man, and he was shyness.
Yeah, it's interesting because you said that you were very shy as a child, and I think that's it. I mean, I was as well, and I think that shyness always plays a role in people's lives that end up being on stage or in front of a camera, because for some reason we're compelled to challenge that shyness. But how did your shyness exhibit itself? I remember, like, as a kid, when I went, I was supposed to run for the school in some big event, and I saw the stadium and just freaked out. There were things like that would come up that I just couldn't do.
I remember when it was, I think, about seven or eight in the 74, whatever that was, 1974. And my mum had a small boutique, as it was called then, a clothes shop, and she did a little fashion show in the local community centre. She wanted me to go down it, and I just froze. I couldn't do it. I was like, no one cared who I was. I had to take a football with me, but I hated. And to this day, I don't like. And my wife's the same. We don't like being the centre. I don't like being the centre of attention. People looking at me. Never been comfortable with it. Don't feel it necessary. But we're all different. We all have different reasons for that. I think going on stage thing. I think it's. I think that's also a bit of a get out clause. It's like kind of being able to communicate with lots of people in one go rather than going individually. And there's also that, like the small gigs are the scary ones. They're playing arenas. It's easy, but them small gigs are the really scary ones. But we do. I don't know why we put ourselves through it. I've got the first gig starting this weekend and I can feel my stomach going already, And I think Paul Weller said he's sick every time to this day still before he goes on stage. Why do we do it, And by the way, you don't look 66. You look really well. What are you doing?
Well, I've had a sort of interesting life like you, so maybe that helps. Tell me about that accident. What actually happened?
I was just before starting high school, so I was 11, 77, and remember the old school parks used to have like a bench, and we'd turn the bench round, and under where the swings had also been vandalised and taken, it was just a frame. So we were running up, jumping on the back and grabbing it, and I fell back. And as I landed, my elbow shattered and the muscle came onto my wrist, the bone. And my arm just fell to pieces basically. So I went into shock. I found out years later it was lucky because if I wouldn't have done that, I'd landed on and shattered my spine. So And then they went into hospital in Salford Royal Hospital, which is kind of in the centre of Manchester. Uh, when they wheeled me in, I had I remember a yellow Adidas t-shirt on, like a yellow Adidas t-shirt. And as they were putting me under, I remember the surgeon saying, "Oh, it's going to have to come off." And he meant the t-shirt, but I thought he meant the arm, you know. And when we woke up, they said, "We're not sure whether it's going to take. You might lose it." And then after about 4 or 5 weeks, they said, "Oh, it'll be okay, but the nerves it might never grow, so you'll have a small arm." I was in an adult hospital because
How did that make you feel, being told that?
well, then I was an emotional child to begin with, and that just sent the anxiety up. I think a lot of it goes back to that. And ironically, Royal Manchester Children's Hospital was really close to the suburb where we lived, but it was full. I ended up in this adult ward, and there was literally a guy next to me who was an alcoholic. He used to give me cans of Mackerson stout. Oh, it's good. You know. Everyone was smoking. There was a guy from Strange Ways across, handcuffed to his bed with two what do you call them, prison officers with him all the time. It was mental. And I mean, parents to leave at night. I just cried at sleep. I hated it. The beds were tight, and so I think that's played a role in a lot of things. But so that didn't help. And after that, I had bad OCD. Not OCD, unfortunately, my wife says for tidying up, but I had what's called it's called pure O now. Back pure O now. Back then, it was called magical thinking. In fact, no, brilliant. The first diagnosis when I was 11 from the psychiatrist was he's got a phobia of thoughts, which I thought was quite anarchic. But looking back, it's actually quite accurate. It's spot on. You know, it wouldn't be allowed today. You know, but it was actually spot on. And
When
so
you
yes,
when you returned to school, were you an
mm,
outsider because of this, because of your arm? You know how
well,
cruel kids can be, you know.
well, it was, and so I ended up there going probably December '77 at the end of '77, and I'd been from the junior school. All the 3 or 4 schools went into this school. And I'd been quite cocky mouth, ensuring myself, and I was good at football, and I was popping, and I thought it was funny as well. So people, oh, you got to wait to meet Gaz when he comes. I remember wearing remember them long trench coats, had flares on trench coats with a buckle tied at the back, and my arm was in a thing. So I was mouthy. And then, but these kids from the school challenging me, and I'm like, when this arm's right, we'll have a fight, you know. And then I remember the surgeon said, "You ever?" And I was never going to do. I was just using it as an excuse. And about 3 or 4 years later, he said, "You can never get into anything. If you fall over, it snaps, it's gone." So then I had to confront these, you know. So some called me out, some didn't. So I ended up getting bullied off some, called me bluff. And it, so and I never, and then 3 days a week I had to go to the hospital. So I was way behind in my schoolwork at that time, and and unfortunately it'd been a grammar school that'd been really good, but my year was full of retrobates because they'd taken in schools where kids that had got kicked out of schools that no schools had taken. So they decided to do the right thing and taking some kids who other schools wouldn't, and it backfired badly. And they'd done it 2 years prior, and there was a crazy year. There was a kid in that year called Bez, who was a bit of a lunatic then. He used to walk around school with his eyes, and we all scared of him and kept away from him. So it backfired. So I kind of lost interest then. But my junior school would be like a little church school, a little Methodist church school, where we'd moved to the suburbs, and where the Mondays very first ended up rehearsing. And the rehearsal room, the very first rehearsal room, was a room I learned to read and write in, ironically. And I got to give me a love of reading. It was a great school, and they had like hippie teachers with classical guitars. So we learned like folk songs, and but they taught me to question everything. We used to listen to the Radio 4 in the afternoon, and they taught us to question everything. You had your little Bible, but you got told to question everything. Maybe that's how I ended up a conspiracy. I don't know. But you know, he was a really good school, and that held me in great stead all my life because the high school was a waste of time. And to this day, I've always got 3 or 4 books on the go constantly. I'm an obsessive reader.
When you got out of hospital, and you know, you had this arm that was, I
Mm.
presume, difficult to use for a long time.
Mhm.
Then, when did the drum kit come in?
Well, so it was kind of like my arm was it was thin and all, and I couldn't use it for up to about feeling came back when I was about 18, but when I was about 15, I could use my arm again. And we formed a group in school, a group, but so punk rock it up. When I was in hospital, and these like hospital DJs played terrible music. Then at midnight on a Sunday, this guy would come in. It's been reported since it's John Cooper Clarke, but I'm not sure it is. It was. And he'd play the Sex Pistols because then most people were asleep. But he'd play Submission and New York, the songs that didn't have the swearing on, which Submission is still one of my favourite Pistol songs, obviously, because of that. And when I came out of hospital, my parents bought me Nevermind the Bollocks. The Pistols had already split up by then, it was all over. I was too young. So Scar was kind of the first thing, and the Special was the first gig I ever went to. That kind of got me. So we wanted to form a band then. And then PD, who became the keyboard player on the Mondays, got a bass because everyone wanted to be the bass player. Everyone wanted to play bass. It was always the coolest instrument. And my friend Anthony Perkins, who wasn't a psycho, he ended up guitaring. And then I said I'll be the singer. So we started rehearsing. I was singing. I wrote these lyrics because me and PD was to write poetry, though we didn't tell anyone. And as we finished, they were looking at me, and I said, "What are you looking at me when you're the singer?" And oh, I'm not comfortable with that. It never really registered. So I got a drum kit, and but I never really played it. I had it in my bedroom for months. But it was never really my passion. Still isn't to this day.
I mean, there's a song on the album, The Ballad of David Bowie. And when I
Mm.
was, I've told this story a million times, so anyone who watches podcasts gets a bit bored with this story. But basically, when Bowie came to sort of my attention as a 13-year-old and as a gay kid, he gave me the possibility of feeling like I could belong somewhere. So I just wondered what role music played for you in that period of your life, in those early teenage years before you were 15.
I think it was the specials and the two-tone thing. Seeing that, I mean, we grew up exclusively in Swinton, which was mostly a white, community. There was one black family maybe from Barbados. Bertie was in my class, and a couple of, but it was exclusively white. And so to see that and that music and people, because I was into black music because my dad, so it's how it all could come together. And it was kind of a time when, the 70s, 70, late 70s England was, well, all 70s England, you can remember, I can remember it wasn't a time, there's a lot of hate on a lot of things. Uh, so to see that really everyone across the country, kids, we don't care what your sexuality is, what colour you are, I don't care. We didn't, and actually I was quite fortunate. There's a small area Wardley, which is a mile, it's an estate a mile wide, mixed of private houses. It was an okay area. There'd only one back, but there'd been four families, and two were actors who were openly gay, and they kind of just got on with it, and everyone got on with it, and they were just accepted, and that was kind of even for the suburbs that was unusual. So we kind of got you. It was kind of it didn't seem like when you go to music hall, going to the city centre. That's when you first see all this, and coming from a white working class, you don't think it's the first thing. People will keep it quiet. And it was open, so it was very normal and acceptable to me. So that was a good thing. But just to see everyone getting on with it, and not caring being told who to hate. I always found that I had lots of suspicion of that. You're from Manchester, you've got to hate Scousers. You're from the north, you've got to dislike the south. Utter nonsense, utter nonsense. And I hated being told who I have to hate, still to this day.
But okay, but not of that period. But what is the importance of Bowie to you then? Because
Oh, so Bowie. So Bowie was a little bit before my time, but my older sister was into him, and I remember the man fell to earth, seeing his haircut, and thinking, what hair like that, because that kind of red with a blonde thing, and I did it once in Japan. It didn't work out. I ended up looking like Marty Kane and not David Bowie, And, for the younger people, don't know that he is, but and it was just the boldness of him, of just and that's what I liked about glam rock. Was a little bit before my time, but I remember watching on Top of Fox, thinking they don't care. I remember Noel Gallagher saying, you didn't see people walking around there. It's with feather boas like Mark Bowling, but yeah, and they spoke with working class normal accents, and it was like. Oh, so that is normal. And then I met him at Glastonbury. We were playing Glastonbury in 2000, and I was backstage uh, talking with our percussionist to the drummer of Bowie's band, and there's 5 or 6 of his voice joined in, and I can't recognise that voice. Looked up, and it was David Bowie. Then everyone left, and I ended up just talking to him, and we both have a fear of flying, not being like flying. And he said, "See that helicopter there? That's my wife's in labour, and they're going to fly me to." I can't remember the air base is South London, I forgot what it's called now. And then I'm going to get a flight to New York. She goes into labour. He said, I can't stand it. I hate it. And then when he was talking about music and stuff, and he said, oh, you should write a book. You should do this, and you should. And he was great. I mean, he probably says that to everyone, but he was really fascinating and very normal. Not normal, but very humble. I think when you get to that level, you probably are. He'd been and done it all, hasn't he? And he just resonated with me. And his music, I got into. When I was at school, actually, when I was about 14, and funny enough, the first song I heard was a friend's older sister, was John, I'm Only Dancing. And I thought, that was quite, the lyrics, I thought, what does that mean? He's dancing with a man or a woman? Well, that's very strange. And I liked, I like that. And I thought, that's brave, and I quite liked it, and it struck on, and then just fell in love with him and the way he looked, just and everything about him. So, and then he died, and I thought we were dying. It was him and Terry Hall, I think, out of all the musicians, and probably Leonard Cohen, but I'd never met them. I mean, I knew Terry Hall, he was a friend, had a real impact on me. And it was around about that time, and then actually, it was usually called the Ballad of David Jones, and about three people said to me, "Why are you writing a song about the singer from the Monkees?" Is it because he's from Manchester? And I went, "No, it's not about him."
The thing about Bowie, and you mentioned, that you're an avid reader, and you can tell from this album that the influences are deep. But Bowie was, in that sense, very similar. That there were so many layers
Mm.
to what he was doing, to his lyrics, and there was such sort of depth. And to me, this feels like something that you have really crafted, this album, and something that you're really aware of the depth of what you're putting into it. Is that true?
Probably, it's really I rush a lot of the lyrics, and I should really spend more time on like Leonard Cohen would spend a week, a month on one line, and I don't, and I'm not that I'm not as authentic as him, but so I should do. But yeah, I mean, just being honest, I mean, Black Symphony was written when I was staying with my parents when my dad had got diagnosed. We knew he had some weird thing, can't remember what it's called now, pulmonary aortism. I think Einstein died of it. And he had, he could die in a year, 2 years. My wife had just started her chemotherapy back in Canada. It was a dark time. And it just came out. And, and everyone says that, but it just did. There were certain lines I wanted to get out. And I am full of regret. When people say I've got no regrets, it got me where I am today. Well, I've got tons of regrets. I'm drunk on regret. That's another song, isn't it? The line, drunk on, but it's true, I've got loads of it. And I look back, that whole thing of it, I wish I knew what I knew now when I was younger. Because and like Bowie went through all phases. We went through phases of occultism, Nazism. Doing lots of drugs, not being healthy, being a Christian, being like Bob Dylan. And I think that's all part of growing up. And does he have regrets with that? Maybe I don't think so.
When you met Paul Ryder, what connected you to him?
When the first rehearsal, I walked into the rehearsal room, and it was Paul Ryder, Mark Day, and Sean Ryder. And I'd met Paul before briefly, a couple of years earlier. We had mutual friends. He was a couple of years older than me, and he's very quiet. But when he went in, the bass was the driving part of the songs, and it was his band. And Sean was a bit more like me. I was very loud and cocky, and Paul was very kind of calm and laid back and slower and more. He wasn't more cerebral, but he was calmer, and he was smooth and he was cool. I found out later he was more anxious than I was, and that's what it was, really. Same with Leonard Cohen. People think these people are the coolest people on the planet, and really they're just really anxious.
It's not weird because I've had loads of therapy, and I discovered that about my life, that the people that I've connected to, whether they're people I know or not, are connected to them because I love their music, or whether I've connected to them as friends, have all got similar issues. Somehow we connect. It's almost like they're there to bring up those issues in us, so we eventually deal with them.
Well, that's the other thing we've got to deal with, and we spend our life running away from it, don't we? Whether it's alcohol or television and stuff. But you've got to embrace it because it's a human experience. But yeah, we seem to attract that. I mean, my wife's quite the opposite, and my partner in Yogi G is quite the opposite. Though his partner's like me. So yeah, you attract the opposite and attract the same. But yeah, I think, modern society, modern living expects a lot of us. The human brain's not developed, it's not grown for 200,000 years. But look what's happened in the last 20 years. We can't deal with this. We wear glasses because we read too much. Our eyes weren't developed to read. So I don't know, and I've got two kids, and I don't know how this world is mental. It's absolutely mental, and it's becoming more binary by the day. What do we do?
Do, do you think that also Paul's death, and that I know Angela
Yeah, of course, yeah.
rather, well, and that his death in 2022 is also part of your introspection, because you were so close to him. You were like brothers, weren't you? You were sort of like an old married couple. You've described it as well, where one ends a sentence of the other.
we pictured ourselves at the end as, the two from Little Britain with the, with the wheelchair. I'd be wheeling him on stage. Uh, yeah, we were like an old couple. His death to me wasn't unexpected. He wasn't the healthiest person. We were very similar in lots of ways, but very different in lots of other ways. And that's where the name Yogi G come from, because I was doing yoga, meditation, and all that, and I'd say something that without thinking that I thought was a little bit profound. It wasn't. It was ridiculous. And I'd go, sorry, Guru Gaz. He'd go, yeah, Yogi G. So it was a piss take. So that's why I embraced that. But yeah, so it wasn't a surprise, but it still affects us today. I was saying to Angela the other week that it just because he was 2 years older than me, so he was like my older brother all the way through the band, and I've known him. And I could say anything to him or do it, I could text or we could laugh at anything, and we got it. We both off on the same wavelength, and it seems that's gone. That really I can't really joke with anyone like I did with him. It's really really strange. Yeah,
So Shine On Brother is really about him.
it's about. It kind of it was I watched this film in Canada, and it was a movie that was out a couple of years ago. I can't remember what the title was, and it was based on a true story, like they all are, I suppose, of some hippies who became Christians. I can't remember what the movie was called. It had become a big cult, and that sparked the opening couple of lines of it. And I remember saying it to Paul. He went, "Oh, I know one. I'm one of them. One of them's in my AA meeting group." And he started telling me about it, and that's where the lines come from. He said like, and he said to me, you know, uh, in his confession, this guy who was a Christian said, still like a little drink, a little smoke. I'll dance all night. I like to wear women's clothes, and all that. And I remember thinking, that's a great. I'm having them like, that's something about them lines. And he said, well, do what you do. It's a weird thing with addiction because I've never been an addict. I mean, Paul used to disagree and agree on a lot of that. I mean, he lived it, but I've been around a lot of addicts. But I mean, I know, he went through lots of rehabs, Angela, and I remember just saying, and said, I've noticed until you're ready yourself. I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because like that's why I used to say, but I don't know whether these, uh, people, well, force people to go into they've got to want to do it, haven't you? I mean, you might know better than me.
You can be addicted to a lot of things, though. It doesn't have to be
Yeah, no, that's true.
drugs. Do you know what I mean?
You're right. I'm addicted to.
But I agree. You've got to change yourself. You've got to be the person that wants to change. Put it that way.
Yeah, but ultimately it comes down to yourself. Everything does, everything comes down to yourself and what's inside there and what's built up in that subconscious. But yeah, it's easy for me to say. But yeah, you're right. I'm addicted to lots of other things. Addicted to moaning, probably my wife would say. But I'm addicted to most things. I've got a obsessive compulsive disorder, of course, but not with drink or drugs. I never did. I was always be able to find that. Never. I was always very good with that. I don't know why, but I always have been. But Paul struggled and struggled. And I remember before he died, we was on going to a festival. He stopped at a service and he was sat outside with his head in his hands. He was popping more of his medications. And like he said, I know. He said, I beat it, but when I come to gigs, it all comes back, and I can't deal with it. And it was awful to see. But ultimately, I have nothing I can do. You really got to do it yourself. You've got to and face the demons.
More to come with Gaz in a moment, including, yes, of course, there are a few Happy Mondays wild stories, but please like, subscribe, comment, and check out popthehistorymakers.com, where you'll find over 140 full-length, really, really good interviews. Now, let's get back to Gaz. Shine On is also sort of a Leonard Cohen influence type song, isn't it?
Everything's Leonard Cohen influence. He's my hero. Everything's Leonard Cohen. I'd love to be, Leonard Cohen as a gentleman, as a human being, as what I know. We never know people, do we? But what I can gather off people that knew and all that, I just met, you see them MTV interview of him. I think he's in Denmark, and he's just so articulate and just so deep and and obviously, he went to a great school and he's one of the richest families in Montreal, so it helps, that education. But then Bob Marley had no education; he was really articulate. So, but yeah, I think Shine On Brother it was kind of we've been watching a lot of Delta blues and that kind of. I love that. Yeah, that kind of not the kind of blues soul stuff, that Memphis soul. So that was the idea, to try and quickly capture some of that if we could. certainly in the chorus. But yeah, a lot of the album, a lot of songs, there's bits of there's one on the next album called After the Rain, and that's a lot about Paul. That's about Paul.
I mean, well, you mentioned this, but you've got, in a sense, because you're writing a book, aren't you, which is titled All My Friends Are Junkies. And well, I've read a couple of excerpts and it's brilliant. And there's one that concerns the time, and you're on the way to the hacienda. I'm going to read it to you because I just
Yeah,
think
yeah, go on.
it's so brilliant. I get it. This must be signifying my new awakening into the world of mind-altering substances. Manchester, famous for being grey, wet, and a city void of shadows, was now animated in a dazzling show of midsummer evening colour as we continued to drive in total muteness, as if all three of us were now swimming in our own little mental adventures. Sean, never satisfied, swiftly rolled and ignited a third joint. He took 4 deep, hurried drags, then passed it back to me. I followed suit and passed it to Paul. I sat back and tumbled into my first ever experience of peaceful, deep thought and began to calmly contemplate the amount of years I'd been trying to banish the obsessive compulsive disorder and negative thoughts that had plagued me since my childhood, a mental civil war that I had long been losing. It's brilliantly written.
Oh, fine. I mean, I'm not a writer. Just how I felt. Yeah, it's funny with writing. When people say that when they write, I find that more with right. You kind of get across what you want to say, and you don't pause. You just write quickly, and obviously you alter things. But yeah, it's funny. What annoys me, and I think Black Symphony is a little bit of that. When I go back. Like when I used to go to the pub with my friends, and even in the band, you're scared of talking like that. And it was all, like I said, a couple of my friends we had a little poetry club in the local library when we were on the dole in the 80s. We could never tell our mates in that. We'd get bullied, they'd take the piss out of us. And it's a shame that being working class and all, why? It's that thing of if someone said, I want to go to, what are you doing tonight? I'm going to you're going to the opera. Well, you're working class. So, it used to really irritate me all that. It still does. But I subscribed to that for years, and I look back and think it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. You've got to put on this image of being, for survival as well, I suppose. Survival. I don't mean physical survival. I mean, survival, verbal survival. And I love that. But I also love that. I love that pub culture and wanting to fit in. But I remember, working. I remember my first job on a building site, and I was hopeless. And at lunchtime, we stopped and we got the sandwiches out, and people, the sun out with the newspaper, the page 3 and all that. And I'd pull a book out and read it, and they're like, "Oh, here he is, dickhead," read. I'm like, I want to read, I want to read." And that was it, and that was, and you just couldn't, and you had to take it. It was funny, the banter was funny, I got paired with an Irish guy called Chris Fowler who got me into Samuel Beckett and James Joyce and all that. So that was good. Even on the quiet, we'll read this, but don't tell anyone, don't tell anybody we read this kind of stuff, which is a shame, really, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I'm also, I don't know if it was on another podcast, but I saw that you like the Charlie Mingus book, Beneath the Underdog, which was, I mean, he died a long time ago, and he'd written a long time ago, and it feels in a way that there are certain writers that have inspired you to write in this way, which is really lovely.
Well, I think why the dark side is fascinating is because we all have that dark side and we all keep it hidden. So when someone doesn't, the Charlie Mingus thing, I've not got through that book yet. It's insane. You think rock and roll bands, the night, and then the 1920s always fascinated me. And I've read nothing from that era. Well, a couple of travel books, but nothing else. Paul Brunton and stuff. But it's crazy. But that's why I think the dark side fascinates us because we like to hear somebody else confess, but we don't. But I can relate to that. But you never admit it. Me and Paul always did. We always admitted that that's we could confide in each other with a lot of that, and we were very similar but very different. But yes, and autobiographies you got to take them with a pinch of salt. And anything, and that's the cynic in me. Sorry, but yeah, crazy, absolutely crazy. But there's a couple of Leonard Cohen ones that just and Bob Dylan absolutely fascinates me, all that kind of people when they kept. People didn't, do the dirty. People didn't do the dirty washing in public. Like now, people going on online to face the camera, and it's bizarre. I find it crazy, absolutely crazy.
I think the other thing that maybe connects you with all these people is this sort of outsider. You know, Bowie was the classic outsider because all his music referenced, in a sense, outsider, alien, all that sort of stuff. And also, you know, I saw that you like, and actually I love his work as well, Federico Garcia Lorca.
Oh, fantastic. Glenn Cohen got me into it. Oh, have you read in New York when he arrives in New York? His description coming from Andalusia as a farmer to New
Yeah.
York, absolutely insane, unbelievable. Yeah, unbelievable.
And also his life, you know, I mean, he was gay, but
Mm.
he was clearly an outsider and probably murdered by the incoming fascists in
Yeah,
Spain.
yeah.
And I think what's interesting is the beauty that can come from being the outsider.
I think I just think I've always felt like an outsider, but doesn't everyone? Doesn't everyone? I mean, I remember I say when I met Paul and Sean Ryder, I'd be, like I say, going to the pub with my friends and football. I did a football coaching course and realised very quickly that this wasn't the surrounding of it. I was shocked. I mean, I'd been on building sites, but this was like another level. And when I met Sean and Paul, it was like they were outsiders as well. They were both, they were in a bowie, and I remember Sean used to wear bleached hair and wear a blue suit. Him and his wife was into bowie. They were like 5 years older, was into bowie, and they were outsiders. But they were working class. They were like me. They were what they called Perry boys and casuals, whatever. But they were a bit different, and they were outsiders. And it was funny because everyone thought we were gay. Everyone, because we were in a band and because we read books, and it was
But it's
and
the
that
expression of that creativity, isn't it? In a way that gives you the freedom from your thoughts, your deeper, darker thoughts, which make you the outsider.
I
So,
mean, yeah, yeah, and but I think. Both his parents were from one from South Lancashire, one from Yorkshire, and they were like very, very loyal. But they like I think they'd come from the one you mentioned the war, and I think after the wars, families want quiet time. That's why rock and roll happens. That's why the Roaring Twenties happened. Where the kids don't want time, quiet, boring time. They want a party, but the parents want quiet because they've been living through a war. And yeah, I think it creates a lot of outsiders. Musicians always were. I don't think they are anymore. Uh, or everyone's a DJ now, aren't they? Bank manager's a DJ. Got tattoos. Having no tattoos is the new tattoos. It's everything's very very strange. But yeah, I think yeah, the dark side. Everyone's got a dark side. As the brain's built not to keep us happy, but to keep us alive. So we're looking for darkness all the time, and it's how we deal with it. But yeah, but also now I'm older. I look back and I think I quite like being on the outside, being outside. I quite like it, but I didn't at the time.
that's really interesting because I remember like seeing an interview with David Lynch, and he was wanting to go to therapy, but then the therapist said to him, if he did therapy, he might not be able to make the same type of movies, so he never did therapy.
Well, I really, I think I think like once you've opened that door, like taking people take LSD, or you have to keep taking drugs or doing things, or once you've opened that part of your subconscious, you can always dip into it. I think so. I think once it's there, it's there. You don't need to carry on doing it. And I think it's detrimental if you carry on doing it because then you get lost in a sea of your own nonsense. So I think when you get older and you get a little bit healthier or a little bit more structured, you can dip into that and take it and use it in a more structured manner. That sounds very grown up of me because I don't really do that. I'm all over the place, but I believe that, yeah.
Tell me about the track "Show Me the Truth." What's that about?
Well, it's funny because the album's now called "Show Me the Truth" because the label thought Black Symphony was a bit too dark, and they might. "Show Me the Truth" was the first one I did, first song I ever recorded solo. I did it about 5 years ago in Toronto, and it was again about the paradox of life, of everything, and what is, I went down the rabbit hole and I was searching what truth is, and then I realised that truth is what you ever wanted, what you want it to be. And there is truths of nature, of course, but man-made truth is man-made truth. And then once you realise that pretty much everything we've been taught is someone else's opinion and maybe not true. And then you start going down that rabbit hole. You stop enjoying everything. Like when I did my football coaching, I started watching football, which is a real passion of mine. And you start watching the patterns of playing, you can't enjoy the game. once you go down the rabbit hole, you can't enjoy life because you start seeing symbolism and everything. You start seeing, and you can't enjoy, you can't just be, you know. So it was a little much a bit about that, and then Mike, the people call him a rapper. He's not. He does poetry and he's a writer in Toronto. He'd never done it before. And I said, we do like a not a rap, but like a spoken word Gil Scott type thing on it. He said, I'm writing something at the moment that's quite dark. I said, he was reading Dante's Inferno. So I said, oh, that's perfect. Something like that in it. And he does, Jake, some of his lines in that, Jacob's ladder, penetrate Mother Earth to a shatter her bladder. And it's short, it's fantastic. And then I just sent it to Rowetta and said, just do some vocal on this, something like, something like really distressing, like, give me, like, I can't remember her name, just on Give Me Shelter, but something where you want to get your frustrations out because she had a lot of frustrations. I said, don't go in the studio, record it in your, because she has a little home studio, record it in your bedroom and scream like you're annoyed at your parents, annoyed at everything, just go and just do that. And she sent it back, and it was like I was like, wow, it's better than I even expected. It was incredible.
One of the reasons I asked that about that track was also that because Tony Wilson was pretty good at manipulating the truth, wasn't he, in terms of the Mondays?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, that thing of the Mondays of these drug dealing scallywags from some northern council, it couldn't be wasn't that at all. But that's what the image, and he'd seen it and gone, that's so he's very good at that. And and I got frustrated with that all the time when people were meeting there. They go, you're not like you expect, but at the same time, like other people in the band have said to me, but it's show business, it's nothing's real. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I
But it was
suppose.
also living up to that cliche in a way, wasn't it? Like if someone tells you that, this is your image is all this chaos, then in a way you start being that image.
Well, yeah, well, you know what? With the Mondays, chaos just followed us organically. We feel like this image we'd bounce into a town loud, lager loud. So couldn't be more the opposite. But it just followed us. It just did. We just had that. It was chaos, it was chaos, and it was yeah, yeah. We never knew. It was exciting, but after a while, it got very tiring. And it took its toll. Paul had a breakdown. I had a breakdown. We ended up in Meadowbrook, which is an institution for people with mental disorders. He was sectioned. I just day sectioned. Mine turned out to be a malaria drug I'd taken visiting my wife's family in Tad's family in West Ghana, West Africa. Um, but it took its toll. It does. Band's a difficult thing, Having, families are difficult. Having a group of friends is difficult. When you've got that together with egos traveling together, and these, you arguing. That's why I think the days of bands. I can have been a band again. Writing songs, compromising. We had to. Me and Paul wrote together pretty much, so we were fine. But we'd have to compromise with the members, and I don't think you really get what you want out of it. So yeah, yeah, difficult. But. mm.
But I mean, I remember talking to Simon Napier Bell, and he said to me once that the artists always believe that fame will be the sort of will alleviate all their psychological problems. But when they become famous, it compounds them.
Mm. Yeah,
That's,
completely. Yeah. Well, he's a manager. He probably saw it all the time, didn't he? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. I mean, you think that everyone thinks that. You think. I think you think. I think that's your own ego telling you that you're justified for all the people that said you were a fool or an idiot or every bad review you had. That's just a personal ego thing. But it doesn't. You know yourself. It just makes things 10 times worse. I can't think of anything worse. I mean, Leonard. That's why I like Leonard Cohen and Bob Dylan. They hid away from that. They didn't want that. And George Harrison to a degree. You know, I. We all have bad days, and you nip to the shop, and you got a bad day, and you get into. I mean, I don't get into confrontation argument now, but I would do when I wasn't very happy with myself. Imagine being that on camera. No, no.
I mean, we
Same
were
with.
brought up in a generation that watched Top of the Pops religiously, didn't we? And as we were very
Mm.
young, and then you appear on Top of the Pops. The first appearance with the Mondays, and you hadn't really. I mean, it's like you hadn't really made it then because I think
Oh.
you were still working, or some of you were still working, to make money, and it wasn't sort of like the full-time occupation. But in a sense, that appearance, and because Top of the Pops made people famous in Britain overnight.
Mm.
So
Mm.
what changes did you notice, and how did you deal with them?
But we wasn't work. Mark, the guitarist, was working. He went back straight away because he had a post round to do at 5 in the morning. But we'd all give up work by then. We was on that £40 allowance thing. I think Thatcher had set up. You know, where I think it was Thatcher, one of them anyway. But we certainly didn't have any money. It was funny because when it was aired, they showed it in Tony Wilson showed it in Dry Bar in Manchester, so it was full. I decided not to go. I thought it'd be too much attention, so I just went to my local pub. Thursday night was the first night of the weekend. It was on Top of the Pops. I watched it. I went to the pub, not thinking anything really. I didn't think. I thought shit few might. Everyone watched it, but I didn't think there'd be my friends would just ignore it because just ignore me. And I walked in and got there something quite early, and I went to the bar. And guy behind the bar went, "Oh, here he is. That's on me." Right, straight away. And I sat down, and my friends were quiet, and everything changed. And I noticed everything around me was different. I thought, that's really weird. I was like, what's up with you all? Oh, you're going to be famous, you're a big child, no. I was like, no, nothing's changed. And I noticed they changed, and everything changed, and you could tell, you know. And I thought I could just go, and it's the beauty of being a drummer at the back. You don't get the same attention. So I thought most of the time you can go out and get unnoticed. But I'd been local pub and bar, and you'd see people looking, and you got to the toilet, and someone would nudge you, wanted to start an argument with you, or wanted to ask you a question. I bet you've had some life, haven't you? No, not really, no more than you. And it does, people change around you, so then you end up changing. I've a lot of people have said that, but I think that's true. I've only tasted it to a small degree, but it must be for singers and people that are really famous. It must be horrendous. Maybe you have to create a character. That's not true. There's a lot of disingenuous, famous people, and maybe that's how they deal with it.
Well, I remember interviewing Madonna once, and I asked her a question, and she said, "Oh yeah, what would Madonna say?"
Really?
Yeah, and I thought, that's how she survives.
That's brilliant.
Madonna's the invented character, so she can, in a sense, I don't know the word hide behind it, but she can save part of herself.
Well, but Bowie's a classic, isn't it? Bowie's a classic of that changing his image. And he said, didn't he say when as he walked on stage, he was David Jones. His passport said David Jones. Remember him saying once he wasn't sure himself whether it was Bowie or Bowie. He didn't know. I thought that was brilliant. I love that. I thought that was great.
The album ends with the track "Power to the Peaceful," and of course, John Lennon comes to mind. Give peace a chance. Power to the people. We seem to live in an era where standing up to power by artists, and you mentioned, people like Leonard Cohen, you mentioned Dylan, you mentioned artists that have stood up to power, has been sort of dropped, and no one really does it.
Well, no one does anymore. You get cancelled. I think it's as simple as that. I mean, I think Dylan's very clever because Dylan denied it. I mean, the evidence was there. We knew what he was saying, but he denied it. So you couldn't hold him to it. But yeah, no one says it anymore. No, and you'd get cancelled these days. We're living in scary times, and I don't want to go down that road. But yeah, we are. And when I did it, it was I was in Canada and I was ill. I've got and you would get two ailments because I'm in back end of my 50s, you're in your 60s, so we've got to talk about ailments. And ended up having I've got this bladder stone, which I've got sorted out. And I was waiting for that, and I was in a bit of a dark time. And a girl in Australia, Diabetes, who had been married to Pete Wilde, said, "I'm doing this thing for freedom in Australia. Will you write something quick?" And I'm like, "Oh." And she was hassling me, and I went, "Okay." And I just got a guitar set, and I thought, who does protest songs and who does a nice melody that make it? And I thought of something cheesy. It's kind of cheesy on purpose. And I thought, Muller Kintyre, it's power to the people. And I just sent it to her. And I redid it. And then when we revisited it, I wanted at the end of the album to close the album just to kind of say, and it is cheesy, but sometimes cheesy is good and cheesy works. And I think it was a case of, no matter how dark it is at the end, it's all going to be all right. I kind of think, and I'm not trying to be some social commentator on on mental illness and all, but it ultimately is. And I think at the end of it, no matter how darkness you told through the album, I just wanted a bit of a bright ending, and we'll probably finish live sets with that one. And yeah, it can be a bit cheesy. And I'm not trying to be, power to the peaceful, we're all, but it truly is. We do have power. If we didn't have power, they wouldn't be trying to stop us from protesting and doing things. We have got power. And I'm just, I grew up uh, kind of, I was really interested in politics. And I grew up on the left side of politics. I started reading Engels because he was in Salford when I was 15, 16, you know, and uh, and now I'm completely. I dislike the left as much as the right. I just like it. Or I hate this binary. Hate this thing of if you say one thing, you're that. If you say that, you're that. And I hate them both. I just hate it all. And it's just no need for it. Just. And I know it's. You know. And just live and let live. People just let people be. And but I know that's not reality. I know people complicate, but I'm just the manipulation of us all. But see, I'm going down that road. Stop it. But yeah,
Okay.
it was just a nice ending to it all. No matter what you go for at the end, we've got to, maybe it's that old British thing. You got to hit the seaside and sit on the beach even if it's raining. And get through it. And it was kind of that. It was meant to be a little bit cheese, but just it's a simple song.
I mean, you mentioned at the beginning about you're going to play these songs live, and you just sort of
Mm.
said it there as well. What type of live event will you be doing? Because you've got such a sort of big history now to go through, and this new album and the deepness of it and the stories you're writing the books. I just wondered what you're going to do in this live event.
You know what I would, and people shot like this. I mean, these are just we're just doing a 40, 45 minute set, and there's some kind of up tempo numbers in there. But I would, I prefer to do them sit down, sit down venues. When people sit and listen. When you can't hear a pin drop. And I think them days have gone because none of us have got attention spans, and I'm as guilty. I'm not. But when you go and you sit down and they talk between songs and they tell you, and not, I don't want to know what the song's about. I like to know how they wrote it, what came to mind. But I like people to decide what it means to them. When I found out, every breath you take by the police was about a stalker, it ruins it, doesn't it? It ruins it. So I like them. When you see Leonard Cohen concerts or Bob Dylan, but I think maybe them days, I think you've got to have a big audience to be able to do that. The unplug. I think them MTV Unplugged idea. It was genius. I never got Nirvana until I saw them Unplugged set. I was like, wow, now I get them. I think that was pure genius. I love that kind of stuff.
What have you discovered about yourself from writing this album that you didn't know before?
Uh, that I have regrets. I should have done it 30 years earlier. I should have done it a long time ago. And that it's everyone. The saying everyone's got a book in him. Everyone's got an album in him. And it really is. And whether you're a guitarist, a musician or a poet, or you're a bricklayer, I can't lay bricks to save my life. I admire someone who can do it. Everyone's got a talent, and everyone's got a story. I think that's the one thing that I don't watch much TV, but I think the thing of reality TV, certainly in the early days, showed us that in fact non-celebrities are more interesting because they haven't got a facade to keep up, and everyone's interesting. Everyone's story is fascinating. Everyone's. And painters have been encrypting that in paintings when you again, which is in the eye of the beholder. But everyone does that, and I think there's a story. Everyone's got usually pain. Usually pain because that's what we can't express as we discussed before. But I think that's the most interesting.
Final chance to like, subscribe, and comment before we get back to Gaz. And yes, it's time for those Happy Mondays stories. We just couldn't resist a couple of them. Is there a story about the Happy Mondays that you haven't told that you could tell me?
Oh, there's so many. Oh, that's put me on the spot again. There's loads. Did but there's a lot of stuff that happened in Barbados, so it's quite funny. But there's some that I can't tell you.
Oh, come on.
Not because of anything. That, what summed up the ridiculousness of it all was when we were doing the album in Barbados. Uh, we were in the first week. Paul was ill. I think now we didn't know we had a problem, so I think it was probably that. But we was in the studio the first week, drums and bass, and the rest of them were out doing crack and getting all that nonsense going on. And I remember going, taking a break. Uh, I wasn't, I wasn't drinking, and I was thinking myself, like the who did I think I was then? I was reading when we did the album in Barbados. I was reading I Claudius, Robert Graves, which is still one of my favourite books to this day. And I thought, I'll go and have a joint. So I wasn't drinking, but I was smoking the local herb. I'll go and have a joint up by the pool and read my book and have a break, and which I used to do. And it was up on the hill beside next to the student. I went up there, and the others had built a crack den out of sun lounges. So it was on this like beautiful 5-star studio, this pool overlooking Barbados, and they'd built, this is the paradoxical ridiculousness of it all. And you could just see this smoke being billowed out of this, like, and it's like ridiculous. And I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. And that kind of summed us up. There's kind of a lot of untruths about us, but again and again, we do feed the monster. So maybe that. There's lots. I mean, I remember I've got a great Paul story. We landed in Denver one night on tour, and we go in, and it was a really bad landing. I didn't like flying, so I said to Mark the guitarist, he'd always come for a drink. Let's go and get a drink. Guinness Irish pub. Let's go and get a Guinness. So we go and get a Guinness, and it's about 8 o'clock at night. We sat in the window. We see the hotel, and Mark says, "What's that noise?" And all these fire engines turned up. And the smoke. And I said, well, he said, smoke coming out the fourth floor. I said, we're on the fourth floor, aren't we, man? He went, yeah. I said, who's in the corner room? He said, I think we used to share then. He said, I think Paul used to share with Bez. I think Paul and Bez's room. I went, oh, no. I said, oh, I'm not getting up. Anyway, the hotel gets evacuated. And they'd fallen asleep with a cigarette, which happened about 3 times in New York. It happened once, and in Boston. Fell asleep with cigarettes and set fire to the hotel room. But obviously the media was like, oh, we didn't. It was, again, organic. And they come out, and everyone had come out, and they were the last 2 to come out. And they came out, and they looked like something from a Laurel and Hardy sketch out the chimney. They had like, the hair was all black soot on the face, and the hair was up. And Paul, who ironically didn't start smoking until he was about 22, come out, he had an unlit cigarette, and we all came out to him, and he'd been all right. And Paul was with this fireman, or firefighter, as they call him in Denver. And Paul said, you're probably the right person to ask, do you have a light? And the fireman went mental at him, like, you think this is a joke? You think this is funny? Anyway, so we kind of backed off, went back to the pub. We turned, and then Bez is talking to us. We do the gig of the night, and obviously Bez has invited all the firemen there. They all turn up. I've got loads. We did the album, sharing the accommodation with all these porn stars. It was, I think. Yeah. I had to go for a swim in the morning before the studio, and I had to make sure I got in there before the porn stars turned up at 8 o'clock in the morning. They'd been on an all-night shoot. I was like, I'm not getting in the pool. I had to get in and get out before. There's this guy called Paul had stayed in this jacuzzi all night, and he didn't have a light. And he'd been there. He'd stayed there for 18 hours. It was one of them on the floor next to the pool. And I got to the pool, and then these porn stars stood up, and they started talking to me. And I was like, oh. And there's this guy, and what was his name? He had a great porn star name. I went over to Paul and went, do you know? And he went, oh, yeah, he was called the Texas Longhorn. I was like, oh. He'd been talking to him every day, you know what I mean? And obviously, it goes on and on. We had lots of stories. But I think, doesn't everyone? Everyone has stories, don't they? That's what I mean. You get it. You go out for dinner with lots of people, and some you don't know, and you'll see the quiet one looking, and a few drinks down, and they go, "So you must have taken some drugs? No more than you. You must have partied, no more, And I said, everyone, everyone had stories, everyone. But yeah, it was just like being on holiday, and we viewed it as that. 'Cause we thought we'd get found out any day, and we did.
Brilliant, Gaz. Well, I think that's a good place to end. Listen, I wish you a lot of success with the album. Show Me the Truth, not Black Symphony, but Black Symphony is a brilliant track. Show Me the Truth. And it's a brilliant album, and it deserves a lot of attention, Gaz. And I think one thing at the end is that one thing that you should have is feel really good about how much you personally and with the Happy Mondays have contributed to pop culture. Because you've been a massive part of people's lives over the years. So I want to thank you for that.
No, thank you for enabling us to tell a story and for your past work. And people, my kids don't understand how important MTV and all that was. Can I tell you a quick MTV story?
Yeah.
Very quick. We was in Brazil. So you know it's not going. And we were doing Rock in Rio, and they kept us and Guns N' Roses away from all the other bands on the edge of town. So we go down into the bar, and Gladstone, I didn't really know Guns N' Roses, but you knew because they're the most famous band. This was 1990, most famous band in the planet. So I go and sat in the bar, and I'm sat next to Duff McClargan, the bass player. And there's a TV in the corner with MTV playing, which is new. And that was, and Guns N' Roses come on. And he jumps up and he says, "That's my band, that's my band. Look, that's us on TV, that's my band." And I was like, "Yeah, you're the biggest band on the planet." And he went, "Oh, thank God for MTV." And then, brilliant. But it was a big deal. It was a big deal.
Up there is an interview I recommend. Down there is where you can find all the podcast interviews. And here is where you can connect.